7 minutes after 9 o'clock, and we're already at 75, but it's not supposed to get all that warm today. We may actually see some, here's a word you don't hear a lot lately, rain. So we may be dealing with a little bit of that over the next couple of days. One other quick note about the weather. Coming up next week, we're going to have a stretch, according to one forecast I looked at today, back in the triple digits. Want to point out, weather is a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. So we're talking about the weather, which also has a bit of an impact on the subject we're going to be talking about. Uh, because heat, when I was a kid one time, I saw the heat was so bad one day when I was sitting inside a diner in my hometown that the street literally heaved up in one spot. Um, they managed to get that repaired quickly and out of the way, but a wintertime takes a toll too as well. We're joined in the studio by Nathan Jerky. He's with the State Department of Transportation, District 4, right, to be clear about this.
Yes, yeah.
District 4, how many districts are there?
6 districts statewide, so we represent the 8 counties in south central Idaho up through Blaine County.
We had this discussion yesterday on air, and it followed a newspaper column I wrote, which got your attention. But right off the top, we should point out there's a lot of overlap because you have a state highway department, essentially. Then you've got counties that do their own work, and then you've got cities and towns that do their own work, which is common pretty much everywhere in the country. And then we have these elected people who serve on these highway districts, I think 3 in Twin Falls County, if I'm right.
4, actually.
4. So you've got all of this overlap going on. Right off the top, is that somewhat of an issue? Would it be better if we had maybe fewer cooks in the kitchen in this situation?
Well, sometimes that would be, I think, beneficial, but we do have to work a lot on our relationships between all the different jurisdictions. The cities, like ITD works very closely with the city of Twin Falls. When we are impacting the highway districts, we contact them, let them know what our projects are in their neck of the woods, and make sure that they get the things that they need to, as far as like access into their roads. Are we just making sure that we're doing everybody correctly? Making sure that it's just a good, healthy relationship and that we work together.
Now, yesterday we had a lot of telephone calls on the subject. A lot of those were related to what happened on Route 30, for instance, after the winter, where if you were driving out through Murtaugh and out to Burley, you would have seen a new craters of the moon being formed.
Yeah.
And those were weather related issues. What I was writing mainly about was my beef with chip seal, which a friend in Jerome County assures me it is highly efficient and expensive, but he didn't go beyond that in any sort of recommendation. That's mainly a city and town issue, though. It's not really, we don't see that, for instance, on state highways.
I'll correct you. We do. We do use seal coats a lot of places on our highways, and you're going to start seeing them on a lot of our highways starting next week. Month of August, a lot of highways are going to be getting coated. I will differ with your friend in Jerome County, though. If done properly, a seal coat is one of the most cost beneficial procedures that we can do to save a road, keep it from going bad on us. So what it does, think of it. So think of this, Bill. If you have you ever peeled off an old roof off an old house,
yes,
where they have 2 and 3 layers of shingles? Well, if people put on another layer of shingles just because they want to save money, they don't want to put money into tar paper, they want to save the labor. So what we're doing with a seal coat is essentially the same thing. We're covering up the potential for holes by not peeling off all the layers and having to redo the base of the roof. And so if we don't put down seal coats, we create cracking, we create that opportunity for water to get into our roadways, and that's where our potholes really do come from. The water infiltrates the cracks, it saturates the base underneath, and when we get our freeze-thaw cycles in the winter, it just blows out underneath in those wet spots, and we have massive potholes. So that's what happened like on US 30. US 30 was a factor of both age as well as weather. That roadway is originally from the 1960s. Hasn't been reconstructed since then. And so it is a factor of that base underneath is just saturated. And so it was just starting to get too much cracking, too much opportunity for water to be introduced, and it was blowing out. We had originally scheduled to be completed last summer. Contractor had several jobs lined up. They planned on doing it in October. We had 3 weeks of rain in October last year, set them back on their one project that they were working on, and then it got too cold in November for them to come in and get that paved out like we have done this spring. So there's a lot of factors that go into how we are maintaining our roads, but essentially a seal coat itself is one of the most cost beneficial things we can do.
No, I can't prove anything. It's just that the two coincidences in my situation where it went down on city streets. Primarily, I do a lot of driving on Washington Street and then some nearby streets. 2 years in a row, I've had issues within a few days where I had a tire, and in both cases, the tire was split where it couldn't be patched because it was sidewall to tread, which leads me to believe, and at least from my viewpoint, and again, I can't prove it because who knows how it happened, but the coincidence of it happening 2 years in a row, that this sealant is actually having some sort of role in my tire damage. Um, so my point was, it may be a cost-efficient way for governments to do this, but as a driver, it's not benefiting me cost efficiency because tires are expensive to replace.
Well, and a lot of times our biggest complaints that we usually get is windshield damage from our chip seals. And I mean, we do put up our signs, slow down. We do give a lot of warning that we are going to be out there doing these roadways. People are still going to drive those roads just because it's usually the most popular roads to drive, like Washington Street. We do it on I-84, so people don't necessarily hear through the news that we are doing these projects coming up. But damage, unfortunately, is one of those things that just does take place on the roads, whether it is a pothole that we haven't patched yet or a measure that we're trying to do to save the roadway. Um, uh, I can't say I really understand how you cut your tire with the seal coat, but hey, anything's possible, I guess.
37 years of playing the lottery, and I've never won more than $50. 2 years of driving on this seal coat, and I've got two blown tires. It's the only lottery I seem to be able to win. But again, I can't prove it unless you say um, ultimately the taxpayers are demanding that costs be kept down. I suppose that's the issue. And I've heard this too as well, that in Filer, the taxpayers literally said they didn't want to pay an additional levy for highway repairs. So is the public somehow also responsible for this?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, so the thing is, well, I'll speak a little bit from what I've heard from some of the smaller jurisdictions. Seal coating is really the only tool that they have because they don't have enough money to go out and start paving 10, 20 miles of roadway every year. Seal coating, you look at historically on some of their roadways, there are layer upon layer upon layer. They're 15 layers deep of just nothing but seal coat. Their roadways were built basically and are maintained that way, just because that is the
Mhm.
only cheap way of doing it. They since a lot of those weren't even actually paved, they were just rolled in with a lot of oil and then just squashed down with a roller. So um, for the small jurisdictions, they a lot of times have to work together. I've heard that City of Buell, Buell Highway District, Filer Highway District, and City of Filer, they all have different equipment. They team up and do each other's roads. They help each other out throughout the summer. That's the most cost-effective way for those jurisdictions to get their jobs done and try to keep their roads intact. Now the state highways, we contract 95% of our work out, and so we're able to obviously afford some longer term fixes, put down some asphalt as well as doing our seal coats.
Wanted to point out Nathan Jerky is our guest, and he is here joining us from the State Transportation Department, District 4. If you've got a comment or question for him, this is an opportunity to get that question answered about roads and future repairs and the like. 736 0300, 736 0300. And we're at 9:15, and we've got 75. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Now, I also tried to make some comparisons to places I've lived in the past that were snowier, colder, and it may well be. Well, tell you what I'll do. We'll get to the telephones first, and if I'm giving a lot of my own examples, and maybe that's not fair to the listening audience. Caller, you're up next, and you're on the air.
Yeah, I work for a highway district, and I want to ask you about the Sequa Highway, why that was made such a mess, and how you had to go back and shave it down. Why not just put a layer of asphalt over those patches and make it look good instead of doing things twice?
Sure. So State Highway 24 is another example, like US 30, where it's a factor of both age, mostly age, as well as the winter that did a lot of the deterioration. Of course, it's multiple winters because it's been several years that we have done anything on that roadway besides patching. Um, so we do, just to let you know, we do have a project coming out on that stretch of road. It's actually funded in 2021. We're trying to get that project on the shelf and ready to bid this winter so we can fix that road next year. So this last winter, we had a ton of freeze-thaw cycle, blew out a lot of sections of that roadway, and as well as the flooding that happened in March on a couple of locations. Our maintenance crews went out there, did what they could to fix some of those. The mix didn't react the way they hoped it would. It just was too sticky. It piled up on them, and so it created more kind of speed bumps than it did actually fill the holes. So we either had a hole, then we followed up with speed bumps, and so they came back and shaved off those and just trying to make a smooth surface that can survive until we get the project out there next year. Uh, we knew it wasn't a good scenario. Well, we knew it was bad during the winter when the road was falling apart. Our crews were trying to do what they could just to keep it together, or filling those holes with gravel base and just so was drivable. And in this spring, it was just kind of one thing after another. And yeah, it was not our proudest moment for our roadways this spring, that's for sure.
We've got another caller with us. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Sure, caller. What's the question?
Yes. Why do we keep hiring the same contractors that they do a job, and next year they're back doing the same job over again? Like on I-84, right out around Greenwood exit.
Okay.
They go out there and they'll work on that highway, and Knife River, everything they do, you got to go back and do it over again. Apparently, but I drive truck, and I see it over and over again where they're the contractor in that area, and they keep hiring them back.
Well, we do have a scenario especially in south central Idaho, where there are not a lot of contractors. So Knife River is headquartered out of Boise, Western Construction out of Boise. We have a couple that come up out of Utah that work for us. And then there's Idaho Material Construction that has some local offices. They are a larger conglomerate that is headquartered here in Twin Falls, but essentially we just have only a handful of contractors that do work here locally, because they're staying busy either in eastern Idaho, Utah, Boise area, and so they're the ones that bid on the jobs. State law requires we take lowest bidder, and those are the guys that we end up with, like it or not, I guess.
Want to thank him for the call as well. About a minute before the break, when I lived, and I was citing the snow and the ice in upstate New York and the cold there, and that the roads seemed to be better, I will admit that when I had to pay my state tax tab every April, it was a lot larger than here. So is it a function of the fact that because we don't wish to spend nearly as much money that things may be better there? We're not going for the Cadillac highway system. In other words, people are on their own.
Yeah, that's one of the things. We see it every year during the legislative session. We hear that there's a $250 million backlog just on maintenance, let alone expansion of our roadway system. So we are trying to keep up as well as we can. We aren't getting the Cadillac. We're maybe getting the Chevrolet right now, and just keeping it functional as well as we can. We are able to do small widening jobs here and there for safety purposes. But as far as keeping all the roads perfectly smooth, it's just not in the cards right now.
You can stick around for a while.
Sure.
Because judging by the telephones, you're going to be a popular guy. We've got more coming up with Nathan Jerky from the State Department of Transportation. That's on the way in a few minutes. We're at 9:20. It's 74. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our guest in studio is joining us from the State Department of Transportation, District Number 4. Nathan Jerky is a spokesman for the department, and Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 74 is our temperature, and folks are interested in talking to Nathan this morning. 736-03. I don't really have to give out the number this morning, but I will. 736-0300. Hey, just a quick mention too. I mentioned the weather is going to be getting hotter again. On that note, if you have a problem with your air conditioning unit, you need to give the pros a call at Ramsey Heating and Electric. They'll come out and they'll get the job done right. They'll get it done right the first time. It's going to be a while before you have to start thinking about turning on the furnace, by the looks of things. Problem-free, and that would be cozy summers in this case, are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Caller, you're up next, and you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to follow up from the last caller. Now, you have a guy come out, bid on the road. They built the road. it starts falling apart within a year. Then they're out fixing it. Who's paying for that?
So if the contractor's still under contract when the road starts falling apart, we can have them come back and do it. If they have already been released from that contract, we've made final payment, then the state is responsible for that repair. Some things that there's only a couple type of projects that we do that we have what we call a warranty specification, where they stay on contract for 12 to 16 months afterwards. And seal coats is one of those things where we do have a warranty specification. If it starts peeling up throughout the winter, then we can require them to come back and fix those. There's a couple other types of contracts, but for the vast majority of them, we have our final payments done generally from our summer projects by midwinter, and then they are generally released from that. So the state is generally responsible because we did already accept their work. We accepted the materials that they used to build the road for the asphalt. We accepted their if it was a base project, we accepted the way they compacted the roadway. We accepted all the asphalt oils and everything. So that is where we take that responsibility to try. Well, a lot of times we have them peeling up asphalt during a project, and that makes a big issue for some people. They see a contractor put down fresh asphalt, and 3 days later they're peeling it up. It's because we have we do try to maintain a very high specification on our materials that go down. So it's not very often that the road falls apart, but when it does, it generally gets shouldered by the taxpayers.
Want to thank you for the call, and 736-0300. We're at 924, and we're at 75. Next caller, you're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yes, being familiar with construction, each state job has a state guy there to inspect and make sure they do that job right. And the contractor that were just mentioning stuff, knowing the bad reputation of that there, when they're in the yard and they swap the gravel for mixing it down when the state guy is in, not on the site, checking and inspecting, making sure the job's done right. But he's in the truck on the tree with the AC on and not watching and following these grade checks and stuff on there. How does that not get away with them doing his checks and making sure they're following their inspections on their jobs?
Sure. So what we do so that we don't have 15 state workers out there trying to check every truck and running our gravel or our asphalt back to the trailer to run the tests on every truck. We do what's called random sampling. We can do it at the asphalt hot plant. We can do it on the roadway. Just kind of depends on what the process is that's agreed upon for that project. And so our inspector, he is probably over there sitting in the shade, which in the hot summer, I don't blame him, doing his paperwork. He's probably sitting there filling out his forms. And nowadays we do have a lot more wireless capabilities. He probably has his laptop open. He's filling out his online forms. And so he is in there working. They do go out, they watch the processes. We are hiring a lot of our testing done now from different companies that offer that. And so there are fewer state guys on the job as there used to be, and because we are able to hire out some of these processes for the asphalt testing. And so they're out there gathering some of those samples for us, doing the compaction testing on the asphalt as well as our base projects.
Want to thank the caller. And I'm not a person who's ever accused anybody of doing this, but I hear this from callers, and it's not the first state where I hosted a radio show where I've heard this, but people say, well, all I do is see guys leaning on shovels. You hear that one a lot.
I've heard that one a time or two. So the thing is, when you drive by at 50 miles an hour, you're getting a 15-second swath of their day. Sometimes they have to wait for somebody else to get their job done. You know, they're leaning on a shovel, but they're waiting for that guy with the grader to push the dirt in the right location, or they're waiting for the truck to return with a truck full of asphalt so they can start filling potholes. Sometimes, hey, we have to own that, where we do maybe have a couple too many guys sitting there watching a project, or we have a couple too many maintenance personnel out doing a certain process. But at the same time, you're only getting a certain swath of their day. If you're sat there and watch them for their 10 hours, you'd probably see a different story.
The other thing that frustrates me is I'll come up on a site and, you slow down for supposed construction, and then you drive for a few miles of cones before you actually see any work, and then there's a workspace of a few hundred feet, and then there's a few more miles of cones.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the function of a project. Like in a seal coat, it moves pretty fast. They can cover 8 to 10 miles in a day. Well, we try to have our flagging companies, the subcontractors, come and move their flagging stations, so we do keep a little tighter, so it's a little shorter pilot line or something like that. But sometimes we have to wait for that product to cure too. If it's an asphalt project, you have to wait for the asphalt to cool down. It's got to be back down to 130 degrees before we can put traffic on there, and it has to have been rolled enough times to make sure that it's compacted properly. So there is a lot of times where, yeah, you got a long process, but it's a function of the project that there is a lot of space between the work and the flagging station.
Got about 30 seconds before the break. I'm going to let a caller get a question or comment, and then we'll get to it on the other side. So, caller, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanna ask if they're gonna ever make it back out to that Sequel Highway. That thing is almost as rough as when the potholes were still there.
We'll get back to that. We've got about 10 seconds before the break, and take more of your calls afterwards. You can stick around for a few minutes.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, we want to point out that this is a follow-up, and it was obviously people are concerned about the issue of roads and road conditions and repairs. And again, point out we may have to pay a little bit more money in the future if we want a much more perfect road. It's 76 right now, 9:30. Bill Colley with you. Our guest is Nathan Jerky. He's joining us this morning from the Idaho Department of Transportation, District Number 4. We've got more on the way. Talking highways this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com, and taking some of your telephone calls as well at 736-0300. Nathan Jerky joining us this morning from the Idaho Department of Transportation, District 4, and he's answering some of your questions and telephone calls this morning. Bill Colley with you as well on the air this morning on Top Story. So caller chimed back in. That was Route 24 again, right?
Yes.
That he was bringing that issue up.
Yeah, so the highway between Rupert, Sequel, out all the way out to Minidoka, there will probably be some additional patching that takes place this fall or the late summer. I do believe that there is actually some paving that's scheduled to take place with our maintenance crew over the next 3 to 4 weeks out in that neck of the woods. I'm not sure the exact extent, but again, that is due for a project next spring or next summer to get an overlay over the top of that and hopefully hold that together for another 8 to 10 years.
I took a drive. I went up the highway toward Sun Valley one day and then just took a right and drove to Arco a few weeks ago. And that road apparently got a lot of snow over the winter and had some issues. But it seemed to me that it was in very good shape compared to what I've seen. Is it some highways seem to hold up better than others? Is it just because they were reconstructed more recently, or
A lot of cases, yeah.
different materials?
Well, and everything is really a function of what is underneath it. So in some places we have really good rock underneath there, drains the water away, and so we see fewer surface issues. A lot of places we have a lot more sandy soils, things that retain that water, and that's where we start seeing our water retention, frost heaves, and as well as potholes and cracking that takes place a little bit more quickly, more frequently. So it is really a function of what's underneath.
I referenced in the column yesterday that there are some of these drainage areas along the streets, and Steve Millington had told me that this was because of environmental regulations. But one was pulling into a parking lot at Albertson Stadium where I thought I was going to tear my undercarriage off because there was such a trough. But you see it as well. I'll be driving some of the side streets in the city of Twin Falls. You come up to an intersection and you've got to crawl through there because if you're going more than 5 miles per hour, you're going to have some issues. Because as soon as you get to that part of the street where that drainage is, does it have to be that deep? I mean, I'm not aware of this in other parts of the country.
So a lot of places, like on intersections that you're referring to, we do have like the gutter pans that do transfer our storm water down the hill and into either Rock Creek Canyon, Snake River Canyon, whatever the case may be. And so a lot of times those get really depressed, or I guess actually the roadway goes upwards over time because of the addition of additional layers, generally seal coats, that do get piled up on top of each other. Without shaving down the roadway and keeping those at lower elevations, we do get the heaped up roadways at the crown of the road, to the center. So that's a lot of the issues I believe around the city of Twin Falls. I guess the thing is that could be done is we'd spend more money If we could do the roadway properly, every time that we needed to go out and do a little bit of maintenance, it would cost us 5 times more, but then you wouldn't have issues like deep gutter pans at intersections.
It's like that old Fram commercial, isn't it? Where you pay me now or pay me later. We're
Yes,
dealing with a
exactly.
little bit of that.
Oh yeah, certainly. A lot of our roadways, like I referenced, the US 30 is 50, 60 years old now. We are seeing some serious problems with wide stretches of roadway right now. Out on Interstate 84, we're starting a reconstruction project between State Highway 50 near the Garden of Eden and all the way out past Eden Hazleton. That roadway is 50 years old. It's a 1970s roadway. The base is starting to fall out underneath it, and we've been seeing some issues. We've put overlays on it. We've put seal coats on it, but it's not a surface problem. It's a problem with the base of the road underneath. We have to go down, repair that base before we can bring it back up and have a good smooth road.
The other thing I've noticed is, and I cited Shoshone Street in the city, but I see it other places as well, where you'll have the troughs from tires
Hmm.
that are created. Now, a caller yesterday said this is because we've allowed heavier weights, but again, there's got to be a way to remedy this, a stronger base, so you don't have these gutters going down the middle of streets.
Sure, yeah, that rutting on the roadways is pretty common. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a function of only heavy trucks. It's probably a function of the number of trucks. There's just more trucks, more cars, more pickups out on the roadway. Our traffic counts are skyrocketing compared to when that road was built back in the, oh, I believe that one is a 60s, 70s roadway as well when they last widened it out to 4 lanes. So it is, so where you do see the worst ruts is at intersections where those trucks come to a stop and then they have to start speeding or picking up their speed again when they get a green light, such as right there by the city park. So we do get really that when they are braking or they are starting in first gear, they exert a tremendous amount of pressure straight down onto the roadway. If you ever watch a truck, it torques when they start, especially if they're hauling a load, it torques the whole truck, and that is nothing but pressure down on the roadway creates those ruts.
We're going to have time for another question, and then we'll answer that on the other side of the break. So, caller, just quickly, what's on your mind?
First of all, I'd like to compliment Nathan and all his crew out there. They're doing a wonderful job from what I've seen. I own a solid waste company business over here in the Mini-Cassia area, and right now they're redoing parts of Highway 81 east of Declo. That road was run down, and they're doing a fantastic job. A year or two ago, they did some closer to Malta, and it's holding up really good. I mean, there's some spots that I've seen that the state of Idaho is doing a wonderful job.
I got to let you run on that note. We'll take a short break, and then we'll wrap up the show with Nathan in the next 15 minutes. If you got any more questions or comments, feel free to give us a shout on the other side of the break. You're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. So, Nathan, the caller chimed in, and was the first compliment you've really had this hour. Nathan Jerky is joining us from the State Department of Transportation today, and we're talking road rehab and road conditions and perhaps what the state or even local governments may need that they don't get in order to finish these repairs. He was referencing some projects that he was looking at while he was on his business, but he mentioned that he's in a business where he's got to be on the roads.
Mm-hmm.
I have brought this up in a previous newspaper column, and I also brought it up, I think, yesterday on air as well, that ultimately, since the federal government handles national defense, ultimately local governments and state governments really, maybe the priority is to keep commerce moving. So if you don't have good roads, then you can't move trucks back and forth. You can't get to Glanbia. You can't get to Boise. You can't get from Nampa to Meridian. There was a serious issue there. But if you've got to, people have to recognize that maybe at some point, taxes, we don't want to pay taxes, but we understand that some taxes have to be paid, that road taxes, and this year the Garvey bonds have altered that equation somewhat. But the fact of the matter is that if you don't have good roads, you can't build an economy, which means you can't keep the children and grandchildren in the area, that there is a tie into all of this.
Oh, certainly. And that's at the mission of ITD. Our mission is your safety, your mobility, your economic opportunity. Primary of everything is safety. We want to create good, safe roads out there. We want to create mobility for people, make sure that there isn't massive amount of congestion, that people are able to drive up and down the road in an efficient manner. And largely your economic opportunity. How can we make sure that your business is moving up and down the road and is helping create not only wealth or opportunity for you, but as well as for the state, helping move the state forward overall.
I wanted to mention too, in a lot of the smaller communities, they have made a decision, at least on the side streets, to stay with gravel streets because number one, it's a bit like putting a natural speed bump in. I suppose you can't get people really racing up and down the streets at 60 miles per hour in the gravel, and they may try,
Yeah,
but these
sure.
are decisions they've made on the local level. And I've read comments on social media where some of my friends who live out in, off the back roads, they don't want those changes. They want that isolation and they don't want a lot of traffic. And they feel that more pavement and a better highway would do that. So there's some competing, what you might call competing interests going on here.
Well, certainly, there's always going to be different priorities for every person. One person wants to have more lanes, and other people want to, especially if they're the neighboring property owner, they don't want to give up their property. So there's always going to be competing interests when we are looking at adding roads, improving roads, or anything of that nature. So it's definitely hard to prioritize and hard to judge what a community needs without us building those relationships. We have several transportation committees that ITD is part of here locally, and there's the North Side, the Twin Falls, the Mini-Cassia, the Blaine County. There's a lot, we take part in all of those and making sure that we are communicating with those local elected officials, with law enforcement that take part in those as well as the highway districts and everybody else. But we want to be good partners and make sure that we're doing as much as what the locals want is what we see is a need out on our highways.
Wanted to point out our guest is joining us from the Idaho Department of Transportation, District 4. Nathan Jerky is the spokesman. We're at 9:45 and we're at 76. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. If you've got a question or comment about the roads, you've got time still to give us a telephone call, 736-0300. I also wanted to mention during this segment of the program, we do this every day. We thank you for listening, but if you're struggling with your hearing, obviously what you need to do is get in touch with someone, and we recommend Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Did you know that Dr. Pickup offers communication skills classes and oral rehabilitation therapy that you can also do at home? At Mount Harrison Audiology, she knows that hearing aids are only part of the equation. True hearing health care should include tools and techniques that enhance communication for you and for your loved ones. Trust your hearing health to Dr. Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology, 208-312-0956. You're a popular man today, Nathan. I was going to say, some people would say, why do you even want that job? But anyway, we have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air. Go ahead. Hello, caller. You're on the air. All right, we'll tell the caller to chime in again in just a moment. 736-0300, 736-0300. Okay, I think we've got our caller back now. Caller, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. Could you please ask your guest, I'm not sure whether this is in his jurisdiction or not, if he knows a time date that they will be finished working on the Hanson Bridge?
Sure. So the Hanson Bridge,
the notorious Hanson Bridge.
Oh yeah,
why we can't build a stadium out there or an event center.
The wonderful old Hanson Bridge. So the Hanson Bridge, just so everybody knows, we will be doing a resurfacing on the driving surface, putting down a sealant on that driving surface, try to make sure that it prevents water from infiltrating that concrete surface, as well as we're painting the steel structure underneath to try to prevent rusting. That bridge is still in good shape, and we want to keep it that way. Hopefully it gives us another 20 years of life before we have to start talking about replacing it. We do expect that the painting will take place for another about 3 to 4 weeks, possibly into September. Then they'll come in and do the resurfacing. So we hopefully will be done with that. Probably it might be early October before we are completed with that bridge.
What a thanker for the call. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yes, I have to say that I've been traveling. Are you there?
We are. We're listening. You listen to us on the telephone versus over the radio. We're on a delay.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Hang on. I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I have to say that I've been traveling back and forth to Haley for 24 years, and
And
and I have to say that the Idaho Department of Transportation, especially during the winter months, has been a godsend for me. And they have just done an excellent job in keeping the roads up to date and filling all the potholes and keeping the snow cleared. I cannot thank them enough. I cannot thank them enough.
so that's the second positive call
Yeah.
you've had at least this
No,
morning.
well, as with most government, thank you first for the compliment. Our guys do go out there and they work their tails off trying to make sure that we keep those roadways open, especially in the wintertime, and try to rectify the problems in the spring and summer. Um, yeah, working in government, you usually get the complaints, you hear the concerns, but you don't always get the compliments. It's always nice to be reassured that you're actually doing something correct or doing following your missions as people would expect. So thank you very much.
We talked off the air about one of the issues that we may have with roads here, and that is, well, I've lived a number of different places. This is my fourth state as far as living places, and I've traveled to about two-thirds of them. I lived in Vermont where there's a solid bedrock. I lived in upstate New York where there's a solid bedrock. I lived on the Delmarva Peninsula, which is just a big sandbar, nothing more than that. But we have a soil composition here, obviously, that is different. And that in itself may be a challenge versus what you get in some other parts of the country.
Yeah, that's certainly a problem. Here in south central Idaho, we lay on our bedrock is largely just basalt, old lava rock, different grades of that, and it doesn't make for the best road base. There are a few outcroppings here and there around the valley that we have some other types of stone that are pretty darn strong and can hold up to a long life of
Mhm.
getting pounded on the roadway. Some of our best locations for rock are locked up in forested areas, wilderness areas, and we're not able to get to those locations to mine that rock. So our roads don't necessarily last as long as what we can see in other parts. There's good rock in eastern Idaho, decent rock in western Idaho. Northern Idaho has tremendously awesome rock, just because our soils here are a lot of blow sand on top of that basalt that just doesn't really give us the strength and stability. And so we do see some of our costs rise because we have to ship rock in from other locations.
We have another caller looking to join us. And caller, you're up next with our guest from Idaho Department of Transportation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the Asequa Highway, Highway 24, from Rupert out to Minidoka. That road has been pretty bad at times, but several weeks ago, I noticed that ITD had gone in and did quite a bit of repair. I've heard a lot of complaints about that road, but I believe that ITD did a really good job of going in and fixing the spots that were bad. And I understand that they're going to come in and do a total rebuild on that road, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to comment on that and thank ITD for working really hard fixing that section of highway, and I'll hang up.
No, thank you for the call. Yeah, Highway 24, it's not going to be a full rebuild when we do come out there next year. It's just going to be a mill and overlay, so we'll remove some of the surface inadequacies and then overlay the top. One of the issues that why we can't just go out there with our maintenance forces right now and spend a lot of money, spend a couple $1 million to try to do something more positive at this point is we have only so much budgeted for our asphalt in our maintenance budgets. And we had a lot of areas, even within that same Foreman area, like in Burley, Hayburn area, where we had a lot of areas that were blown out, potholes, that we had to repair those as well. US 30, a couple locations further east of Murtaugh, where we had to do some repairs. So we are just trying to prioritize, move the money around, and try to get as much done as possible with the limited budget that we have for our asphalt maintenance.
I made a trip out to Declo in February, I guess it was, and it was right after we had the serious flooding that struck that area. And I assume that some of these roads were underwater for a couple of weeks, and that itself may have caused more than a few headaches.
Yeah, certainly the highway districts suffered far more than the state highways did. But yeah, that surface water has the opportunity to completely saturate the base underneath. And then we put load limits on those kind of roads so that we aren't having trucks, really big heavy trucks, especially if it's a 129,000 pound load road, that we aren't promoting additional wear and tear of that base. We have to wait for that base to dry out as long as possible before we can remove those load limits.
Speaking of the load limits, and that caller yesterday did reference the fact that we increased load limits over the course of a number of years. And the other part of this is when we're out on the interstate and we see these people pulling, double and triple trailers. Some states don't allow that. Now that is done because obviously it helps commerce and it helps the efficiency of shipping. But when those decisions were made, did we take into account the beating the roads would take?
So there's an engineering equation, and it comes up to the word called easels. And it's
Oh, you've done your homework.
yeah, a little too much over the last 10 years. So it's basically you're calculating how much weight per axle per tire per square inch, essentially what we're looking at. And a lot of times as you lengthen out the load, you're actually lengthening out your weight and your wear and tear. You're putting more axles underneath each truck. And so an 80,000 pound truck is generally just a truck with a single trailer. A 105 truck is a truck and two trailers, usually a small pup in back. And then you have the 129 loads that are a truck, a trailer, and a bigger pup. But it has more axles underneath it to try to spread that load out more evenly. A lot of times what we see is your standard 10-wheeler, something that we do a ton of commerce with. Your garbage trucks, farmers drive a lot of 10-wheelers, can do just as much or more damage on a roadway because of their weight than even the 129s, just because the way the weight is distributed and pushed out across many axles. And so at least this is the explanation the engineers give me. I'm not going to argue over the air if somebody calls in and says my 10-wheeler doesn't do the damage that big truck does, but it's all about your weight and your pounds per square inch, essentially, how we're spread out.
And some of those wheels have to be down. If they're raised, we're going to have more pressure on the remaining tires.
Yeah, well, sometimes, well, when we do have those bigger, heavier weights, they have more stringent requirements on their braking systems, and as well as what their tire pressures, and if they do have the raisable or axles, making sure that when they are loaded, those do come down to try to assist as much as possible.
Got about a minute and a half to go. I was having lunch one day at Pizza Pie Cafe and just shooting the breeze with one of my state representatives, and he pointed out that this is an issue maybe not necessarily related to transportation, but when the state decided to allow a two-tiered speed limit on the interstate. So you've got some trucks that have governors on them. I know this because I had an uncle who was a long-haul truck driver, and his boss definitely put a governor on that truck at like 67 miles per hour because he knew what my uncle was like. And he was always in a hurry, and he definitely had a lead foot. But the point of the matter is some trucks can't make 70, so other trucks pass them, but they can't go over 70 in the passing lane, which then slows down traffic. Do we need to revisit that?
That is definitely a legislative decision for that kind of activity. They take the advice from both the Idaho Transportation Department, the trucking industry, as well as like organizations like the AAA that wants to voice their concerns on that speed differential and what it does out on the roadways. Um, I guess we could look into the data a little bit deeper and see if there has been an increase of truck versus vehicle crashes since that decision was made, and that would probably play into that decision. But it definitely is at the legislative level where that comes in.
I see differences when I go to Utah or Montana, for instance, and I'm just wondering, can we look at what they're doing too as well and maybe take into some account and make some decisions from there? I mean, we don't want to always imitate what our neighbors do, but sometimes a good idea does come out of, somewhere over there, Helena or Salt Lake City.
Oh, sure, yeah, and we do look at how the different laws across the states do affect their traffic and their crashes and things, all kinds of data points. So we definitely aren't trying to create the wheel all by ourselves all over again. We do watch and learn from other states.
Before we wrap up, we were talking off air about the web presence you have. If people would like to keep updated on what's going on, where do they go?
So our web address is itd.idaho.gov, and people are always welcome to give me a call at our office in Shoshone. Our phone number is 208-886-7800, and just ask for me, and I will try to do what I can to help you out.
I want to point out Nathan is here on short notice as well, giving up a part of his day. We sort of cooked this up yesterday after the show. I do want to thank him for coming by today. It's 9:58. Rush Limbaugh's program is coming up next following the news. It's 77 right now, news at 10 o'clock from Fox. And God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here all over again tomorrow morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.